With You, Part 2. We were still on the high of the thrill of our escape. I did not want to come down. I could not believe that finally, we were free to be who we wanted to be. We took turns driving through several towns. We did not want to stay for long in those towns, for we wanted to get as far away from our past as we could get. The first town that we settled was in a town by the sea. We paid for a room with 2 single beds and explored the town for a few days. I had never seen the sea, never been out of my state. I was stunned when I saw it for the first time. I'd only seen it in the images and videos, but not in real life. Alan had seen it before, when he had traveled with his mom and his dad when his mother was still alive. I was a bit frightened of the waves, but he held my hand while I was getting used to the water. I suddenly felt myself being splashed by water. "You are so dead," I chuckled darkly as he ran away from me, water splashing everywhere. I caught up to him and started splashing him with water. We ended up stopping because we were laughing so hard. Then I noticed him staring at me. "What?" I asked him. "You look very happy," he smiled. "And so do you," he smiled. We liked the town so much that we decided we could stay there for several days. We got jobs working for a fisherman during the day. It was hard work, but I liked it because I got to spend time in the sea. I was in love with the sea. He was glowing like I'd never seen before. I could see that running away had been a great idea. The nightlife was nothing too exciting in that town, just a few beers with the locals after work. Eventually we got in this car and we moved on to a different place. This time it was a city with fast cars and a wild nightlife. I got a part-time job working at a coffee shop, and he got one driving taxis. With the little money that we had, we got a small apartment. He loved the city with all its bright lights and wildness, so he asked if we could stay there for as long as possible. I did not see a problem with it, so we stayed. During the day we worked hard, but at night we partied like no one's business. We hit every club that there was, making friends nearly every day. We danced the nights away and drank everything we were offered as if the night would not end. I never wanted it to end, for I was always with him. We had a few love affairs in the city, never going home alone. I did not like seeing him with other girls, so I would distract myself with guys. And boy, did I have a lot of lovers. Pretty boys that I would forget the names of the very next day. But he was always in the corner of my eye, as girls crowded around him, each one wanting to go with him home. And I hated it. I hated seeing their clothes strewn all over the floors every morning. But some nights, we would not go out. We'd be too tired to get up from bed, and on those nights, we talked about the places that we would visit in a few weeks' time, the food that we wanted to try out. Those nights were my favorite, because sometimes we would fall asleep talking and I would wake up lying on his shoulder, the sound of his steady heartbeat in my ears, and I would be so happy. One night, I heard him screaming while we were asleep. We usually had a bit to drink before we went to bed, but that night we were broke, so we had nothing. I got up and went to his door. I knocked, but I got no answer from him. So I decided to get in. He was tossing and turning and mumbling in his sleep. I climbed onto his bed and I put my hand on his forehead. He was sweating a lot. The only thing that I could make out was, "Don't hurt her, Dad." He was having a nightmare. He suddenly sat up beside me and started breathing fast. I got up to turn on his main light since he only had his night light on. He was shaking all over and looked very scared. He had been so happy for the past few weeks that I assumed he was getting over his past. Little did I know that it still haunted him to such an extent. "Alan, are you okay?" I asked him. "Yes, it was just a dream," he said. I sat down next to him and took his hand. "Want to tell me what happened?" I asked him. He was silent for a moment. He did not say anything. "I always have the nightmares. Do not worry about me. Sorry for waking you up," he said. "You look shaken. Was it him? Did you dream about him?" I asked him. "And Mom," his voice broke. "I know this is probably intruding, but what happened to your mother?" I asked. "It was his fault. He is the reason that she is no more," he replied. "How so?" I asked. "He broke her hand the night before she died. He refused to take her to the hospital, told her to fix it herself. So the next morning she drove to the hospital with a broken hand. She lost control of the car and..." He did not finish speaking. He broke down in front of me. He cried for a very long time, clutching onto my pajama top. My heart broke as I saw him break down like that. He was opening up to me now more than ever. This made me fall more in love with him, the man who woke up each day and faced it with a smile despite all the turmoil in his heart. "Sorry, Alan. Sometimes the people we love are taken away. Even though they're not with us, they are in our hearts," I told him. I knew that my words probably didn't make anything better, but I was there for him. Sometimes I feel like she is watching over me. I feel like everything will be alright, he said. She is, I said. You want to stay with me tonight? He suddenly said. My head told me that I should not. I was falling in too deep with a person who did not see me in that way, but my heart was so weak. I curled up beside him, and we cuddled. It felt so right, and I felt his body loosen. I want to leave this place, he said. Why? I asked him. Feel like we're ready for a new adventure, he said. Whatever you want, I said. Then I did something that I instantly regretted. I kissed his hair. I froze for a moment. He was probably going to think that I was weird for kissing him there, but he just smiled sleepily and fell asleep. I watched him snoring softly for a while before I fell asleep. Something changed between us that night, but in a good way. We packed our stuff in a few days and moved to another town. This town was a bit closer to home. I asked him why he had chosen this town, and he said it was because he had found good jobs for us there. It was sales positions in a company that was starting up. It paid a whole lot more than odd jobs that we had been doing from town to town. We got an apartment with 2 bedrooms. Despite that, I had been sleeping in his room ever since that night. It was an unspoken agreement between us. We would go to sleep snuggled up in each other's arms. He also had anxiety since we were only an hour from our town, but we needed the money so that we can go study in the next year. We went out occasionally, but we had stopped getting lovers. When girls tried to talk to him, he outright ignored them. He wanted to spend all of his time with me. He would hug me nearly every morning and do things for me that he had never done before. I was surprised, but I tried not to think too much about it. I liked the attention that he was suddenly giving me. He held my hand some days when we were out. I would look at him strangely but not say anything. I wanted to ask him what was up with him, but I guess I was a bit shy. I did not want to ask him if he had any feelings for me. Maybe he was just really dependent on me, and that was why he was acting like that towards me. Then one night, when we were out, he did something strange. He went to get us a few drinks, then left me on the dance floor. I like to dance just like the next person, so I danced with a few people. Then this very attractive guy came up to me and started to dance with me. I figured that there was no harm in dancing with him, so I did not think much about it. That was until I was being dragged off the very next moment. I saw a whirl of curly hair and familiar eyes before I was outside. Alan was holding a drink in one hand, and my hand in the other. What's up? I asked him. What are you doing with that guy? He asked. Dancing, I rolled my eyes. Were you dancing to bring him home with you? He asked. I frowned. I never thought that he had a problem with me bringing guys to our place. I had done it in the past. I liked him. Why? I asked. What about me? He said. His voice was low and he sounded very sad. Could not be. Was he jealous? What do you mean? I asked. Forget it. Sorry, I acted like that. Of course you can bring someone home. I got really used to having you at night. It helps me with the nightmares. He looked down. My heart melted. I did not want to bring anyone home. But looking at him every day hurt. The only way I could move on from my crush was to distract myself with guys that were actually gay. But he needed me. No, don't apologize. I was not going to take that guy home. I'm too tired for anyone nowadays anyways, I said. Even me? He asked. Of course not. You're my best friend. Oh, and where's my drink? I asked him. He started to laugh nervously. I rolled my eyes and swiped the one he was holding and took a huge gulp. You'll pay for this, he puffed out his cheeks. I had the sullen urge to tell him that he looked like a cute chipmunk when he did that, but I was afraid that he would box my ears. You take credit? I asked him, laughing. Only hugs, he smirked. Gosh, he was so cute. I could not. We stayed in that town for several more weeks. We had both applied to the same colleges. If things went well, then we would go to school in the following year. One day while I was at work, a man walked in. He looked like a very wealthy man and seemed very intimidating. I went to attend to him and found out what he needed from the store. As I was talking to him, I could not help feeling as if I knew who he was. I just could not make out where I had seen him. As he was about to leave, Alan came by to hand me a document. The man's eyes followed him as he walked away. I found it strange, but I thought that maybe he had been helped by Alan the last time that he had been there, so I did not think too much about it. He left me a very generous tip and he was on his way. That night we had just gotten paid, so we thought to get some sushi for ourselves. It was one of the dishes that we both loved. Most of the time we argued over what food to eat because we had different tastes. Whoever had the energy to cook had the right to choose on that day. You know, we've come so far, he said. I cannot believe that we have our own home now, and we're happy, I said. It's all thanks to you, he smiled. What do you mean? I asked him. You rescued me, Peter. It's because of you that I escaped from that monster, he said. I could not leave you, I said. It had not always been easy on the road. Sometimes we got so broke that we survived on tinned food. We had gotten our stuff stolen and gone hungry several times. We had nearly gone back so many times, but we were reminded that all we had left behind were death and decay. Now it felt like things were finally on track. We were just waiting on our acceptance into college. It had been a whirlwind of a year, and I would not take it back. Thank you. You risked a lot. You've always been my rock. It took me so long to see it, though, he said. What do you mean? I asked. His gaze was fixed on me, and he was looking at me with such passion. I looked down. He was so intimidating at times, and it scared me. I see you, he simply said. I smiled, unsure of what he meant. I see you too, I replied. Gosh, sometimes you can be so slow, he said. Then he kissed me. I was shocked for a second, electrified by his bold action. In that kiss, I felt so much emotion. It had been building up, this fire between us, for so long. I had taken the little that he gave me, convinced that we were nothing more than friends who cuddled. But when we kissed, I got the confirmation of his feelings. This was better than words. His kiss was so much more. I pulled away from him and we looked at each other for a few seconds. You know why my father did not like you? He asked. I frowned. Why? He said that you looked at me in a certain way. That a man should not look in another in such a way, he said. He had known all along that I had feelings for him. And you, what did you feel? I asked him. My father would kill me if I even entertained the idea, he said. I nodded in understanding. But that night, when we cuddled for the first time, I felt that I cared for you deeply. I always had, he sighed. But you were not ready, I came to that conclusion. No, I was not ready, and I was afraid, but started realizing that I cared for you more than I cared to admit. I have no idea how long I've waited, I smiled. Let me make it up to you, he grinned. He pulled me closer. I kissed him deeply, savoring the unfamiliar feeling of his lips on mine. His hands were tangled in my hair as I pulled up his shirt. He had so many scars from his father. I wanted to take all those scars away. I had no such power, so I kissed them all, one by one. He breathed heavily as I kissed each and every one of his scars. Suddenly, the hard line rang. It barely ever rang. I was too caught up in him to care too much about it. I tried to get up and answer, but I pulled him back to me. You can wait, I whispered. His eyes darkened and we forgot about the landline. That was when we heard a knock on the door. We never got any visitors. It had to be someone who was lost. I reluctantly left him, shirt off. I hate that we'd been interrupted by such a time, but what could I do? I promised that I'll be back in 2 seconds flat, I said. You better, he grinned. I chuckled as I went to open the door. The last person that I had been expecting to see was at the door. It was my mother, who had been knocking on the door. My jaw nearly dropped when I saw her standing there. What are you doing here, Mom? I asked. You left without saying goodbye, she smiled sweetly. I had a very bad feeling before I noticed that she had someone who was standing behind her. I felt ice-cold fear as I looked into eyes full of anger. He was the last person that I wanted to see, and the one that had been running away from for a year now. And now he stood before me. Alan's father had found us. We were dead. I did not believe it when I heard it. You two thought that you could run away from me? He said darkly. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force and stay wholesome.